Howdy y'all, today we're going to be looking at a video from PragerU. Now, 1/3 of Americans have seen one of their videos, despite big tech supposedly censoring them, so I'm sure you don't need an introduction to what PragerU is. The video that I want to take a look at today is Who's More Radical, the Left or the Right? Narrated by Will Witt, the charming millennial counterpart to Dennis Prager's Old Manness. I'll link the video in the description if you want to watch it, but I'll cover most of it here since, it's 5 minutes long.
There are crazy positions on the far left and crazy positions on the far right. On the left, there are people who believe a man can get pregnant.
Aw, geez, it's gonna be one of those videos, isn't it?
That the world is going to end in a decade if we don't cap carbon emissions. That the real purpose of the American Revolution was to preserve slavery.
I'm sorry that I'm going to be interjecting like every other sentence, but it's genuinely hard not to with these videos. Alright, so here we have what PragerU considers to be crazy leftist positions. Now, thinking trans people exist isn't exactly revolutionary. Even some Republicans think that, but these people couldn't tell Joe Biden from Joe Stalin, so I guess I'll let that one slide. I really shouldn't, but there's 4 more minutes to get through here. So the second bit is just blatant lying about what the position on climate change is, and it's not the left's position, it's the scientist, but I know Prager's never been one to let facts get in the way of their feelings. And the last bit is definitely true for some of the revolutionaries. In the grievances listed towards King George in the Declaration of Independence, the final grievance states, "He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us," in reference to slave revolts. I personally wouldn't label it as the primary reason. There were 26 other grievances after all, but I'm pretty sure no one else is either, and ignoring it completely is just blatant historical revisionism. And not the kind PragerU hates where you're more accurately describing the experiences of slaves. The kind that's actually bad, where you're just ignoring all the horrible shit the country did. Anyways, let's see what the far right thinks.
On the right, there are people who deny the Holocaust happened.
Yeah, they're making videos for you.
Who believe that whites are inherently superior to other races, that no one should pay taxes.
Alright, well, at least they're more honest with the right. I know that's trying to separate PragerU from the racist part, even though, just for a brief rundown, they had a Nazi make a video for them. A month after this video came out, they retweeted Nazi propaganda from another neo-Nazi. And just recently, they tweeted, "The free market will set you free," on Holocaust Remembrance Day, which I'm sure you know is a really weird day to tweet that. But Dennis is Jewish, so none of that matters anyways. So now that we've got our boundaries set, they can't really make much of a point because the left is completely misrepresented here, but let's see what they try to say about it.
But there's an important difference between these two extremes. The crazies on the right have no voice. They are shunned. They live mostly on the far fringes of the internet.
Okay, so in PragerU's defense here, this video was released 6 months before the white supremacist attack on the Capitol. But no, they don't get a defense. This was still 3 years after Charlottesville. This was still 4 years after Trump opened his campaign saying Mexico was sending us rapists and won. The crazies on the right have no voice. Give me a fucking break. David Duke was elected to the Louisiana State House as a known Klan leader. Steve King holds blatantly white supremacist views, such as belief in white genocide, and he got elected to the US House 9 fucking times. Heck, PragerU has personally given a voice to the crazies on the right.
The crazies on the left have a loud voice. They are celebrated. They live in the halls of Congress, in state legislatures, and in governors' mansions.
I mean, if you're defining the crazies on the left as anyone to the left of yourself, then sure. But let's be honest here. It's not like the far left is actually celebrated in American politics.
In light of this distinction, it might be interesting to ask ourselves this question: which group, the left or the right, is more radical?
The right. Like, this seriously isn't a question right now, is it? You opened the video saying the right has Holocaust deniers and white supremacists. No matter how much you hate trans people, pretty much anyone would look at this and realize it's the right. Right?
We can arrive at a common sense answer by posing this thought experiment. What would America look like if the left got everything it wanted, and what would America look like if the right got everything it wanted?
No? We seriously need a thought experiment here? Okay, go ahead.
Let's start with the left. Taxes would go up on individuals and corporations to pay for more social programs. Everything from universal childcare to free college tuition. Many on the left call for income taxes as high as 70%.
Oh wow, the left plans to actually do stuff? I'm terrified. Nah, but the taxes as high as 70% statement is one of the most basic conservative scaremongering tactics in the book. That's the highest figure anyone has floated, and it's AOC's plan to create a new tax bracket. So it's not even just increasing the top tax bracket to 70%, it's creating a whole new tax bracket. And PragerU is hoping that viewers will think the left wants everyone to be taxed at the 70% rate. I guess it's working.
The Green New Deal would be adopted. Hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidies for wind and solar power would be added to the federal budget. Drilling for fossil fuels, the current source of 80% of our energy, would be sharply curtailed or eliminated altogether.
In case it's not obvious, PragerU gets funding from fracking billionaires. But yeah, mitigating the effects of climate change is worth it. I also think that saying fossil fuels are the source of 80% of our current energy supply is a really weird argument for continuing to use them. Like, slaves accounted for most of the cotton production in 1850, but that didn't make it a good thing.
College debt would be canceled. Those who had already paid for college would get nothing.
Why should we continue to screw people over just because we already screwed tons of people over? Our education system should not be functioning as an Ouroboros of human misery.
Transgender women, biological men who identify as women, would be allowed to compete against women in sports.
So I could respond to this statement. Talk about how after some time on HRT, trans women are shown to not hold any edge in sports, or how trans women have been eligible to compete for several Olympics, yet none have ever so much as qualified, so there's hardly a competitive edge. Or muse on the existence of biological advantages within cisgender athletes, and sarcastically ask why they're never the topic of conversation. And I did, just there. But the deeper part of this that I want to address is how when PragerU says they care about protecting women's sports by excluding women, I find it incredibly hard to believe that they actually care about women's sports at all. I mean, the guy who edited this script also wrote an article chastising the US Women's Soccer League for being too political by asking for equal pay. The women's sports argument just reads like the latest tactic to halt acceptance of trans people.
America's military budget would be slashed by 25 to 50%.
If you cut the US military budget in half, we would still be spending $100 billion more than China. And if you're so concerned about increasing taxes, it seems like cutting our insane military budget would be a good thing.
Speech codes would be enforced throughout American life.
Not gonna comment on this one right now, but keep it in your mind for later. Anyways, that's the radical future ahead of us if the left gets everything. Nothing in there is particularly radical. I'd say the Green New Deal is probably the most controversial idea in there, and it's still super popular. Will would probably see that popularity as evidence that the radical left is the majority of America, but it really just demonstrates how far to the right he and the rest of PragerU are. Speaking of the right,
Now let's ask what would happen if the right got what it wanted.
genocide. Okay, but seriously, their own definition of the extreme right includes white supremacy and Holocaust denial. So, bare minimum, we're talking like a Jim Crow style society here, right? Let's see how PragerU digs their way out of the Nazi hole.
Income taxes would be cut. Capital gains taxes would be cut. Corporate taxes would be cut. And those cuts would be made permanent. All regulations that make doing business unnecessarily difficult and don't protect public health would be repealed.
Oh, they're just gonna pretend they didn't say it. Well, maybe they'll address this later. For now, let's take a look at what they want you to think is a very good idea. Now, tax cuts sound nice, but they're going to have to come at an expense. And PragerU doesn't address what that is, but we'd almost certainly see cuts to healthcare and Social Security, programs which help a lot of people. And if the 2017 Trump tax cuts are any indication, these cuts will primarily benefit the wealthiest in our society. And giving more money to the richest people doesn't really do all that much for the economy because hoarding wealth isn't making the markets turn. As far as regulations go, protecting public health is the reason for a lot of them. Child labor laws, environmental regulations, and worker protection laws are all designed for this. One has to wonder what regulations Prager is referring to. If we're talking the far right, I'm guessing they'd like to toss out the Sherman Antitrust Act. Not being able to monopolize an industry does make it more difficult to make as much money as possible after all.
The issue of abortion would be sent back to the states for each state to decide its own abortion rules for itself.
Let's not kid ourselves here. It would not be sent to the states, it'd be outlawed across the nation. If you believe abortion is murder, you don't say, let the states decide. You outlaw it. So either they don't actually think abortion is murder, or they're lying to try to paint the far right in a kinder light. Or, it's both, and they just want to screw over as many women, men, and non-binary homies with a uterus as they can. And just to be crystal clear, outlawing abortion would not reduce abortion rates.
In order to vote, citizens would need to present a valid ID.
I mean, the more far-right position would be to take away voting rights from minority groups entirely, but voter ID laws accomplish that on a smaller scale and don't sound as bad, so I guess that's what they're going with.
The border with Mexico would be secured. The only way to enter the United States would be through designated border crossings.
Does PragerU not know what a plane is?
The healthcare system would be open to free market reforms. For example, insurance companies could sell policies across state lines.
They already can in some states. They just don't because turns out it isn't the fix-all the right likes to pretend it is. Omitted from this point is the millions of people that will lose their health care.
Students in elementary school would recite the Pledge of Allegiance at the start of each school day.
They already do. But do you guys remember how the left section ended? Don't know if left bad because they will force speech codes juxtaposed with right good because students will be forced to say pledge was intentional, but it's pretty hilarious. I mean, they can't even go 5 minutes without being hypocritical.
So what can we conclude from our experiment? It's not hard to figure out. If the right got everything it wanted, the government would get much smaller. The citizen would have more freedom. If the left got everything it wanted, the government would get much bigger. The citizen would have less freedom.
Oh no, you'd lose your freedom to die from lack of health care or go into debt to pay for your college. And, it's funny that it's only ever big government when we're spending the money on helping people instead of spending it on killing foreigners.
Which country do you want to live in? I'm Will Witt for Prager University.
So why does this video exist? Well, I think it's pretty clearly an attempt at shifting the Overton window, trying to tell the viewer, hey, the radical right is better than the radical left, so become a conservative. Yet, funnily enough, they never actually address the far right that they defined? I guess it's just harder to shift the Overton window when you're saying, yeah, the right will kill you if you're gay, but the left will give you health care, so become a conservative. But now let's address the more interesting question. Who actually is more radical? Now there's a couple definitions we can go by here. If we're using radical as a synonym for cool, then it's obviously the left. I'm 100 times more baller than Reagan, and I'm not a corpse. But I don't think that's the definition we're using here. There's also the definition of radical as representing an extreme position, and since we're looking at the furthest ends of each side, it could honestly apply to both here. I think the far right is more extreme because, Nazis. But I'm sure someone further to the right of me would say the same about the far left because they think the Nazis were actually socialists. But those aren't the definitions PragerU is using here. Let's see how they define it.
You're not radical if you want America to be what it's always been, committed to individual liberty. You're only radical if you want to fundamentally transform America into something it's never been.
And as much as I hate to say it, PragerU is right here. Being radical really boils down to wanting to fundamentally change the system that you live in. The abolitionists were radicals. The women's rights movement were radicals. The civil rights movement were radicals. The workers, the LGBTQ, every single group that stood up and said, "We are people too, start treating us like it," were radicals seeking to overthrow the current social order, and it is fantastic that they did. In reality, the question isn't who's more radical, the left or the right, but instead, do you want to be U.S. Army General Robert E. Lee defending what his country is, or radical abolitionist John Brown fighting for what it could be? Yeah, so that was my first serious video. I hope you liked it, and if you'd like to support me, you could like and subscribe. I don't have much education in video editing or audio production, so if you noticed anything you thought was off, please let me know in my comments, because I want my videos to be as good as they can be. I'm using Premiere Pro and a blue snowball, if that's relevant information at all. I'd also recommend that you check out Sean and Jose. They both make really good videos, and I may have taken some stylistic ideas from them. And lastly, if you have any ideas for videos you'd like to see, whether that's another PragerU vid you want me to look at or something else entirely, leave it in the comments. Thanks for watching.